This is the shore, and the waves keep crushing in.
A city that had a war too. Welcome to the International War Veteran Podcast Blood Diamonds and Gold.com. Today in the interview, Show Me Your Warface host Pete Dowsing, Kosovo and Iraq war veteran of the Royal Army. Sapper and Queen's Jubilee recipient. Mr. Dowsing shares his experience in war, PTSD and his life on Instagram and YouTube to help people with PTSD. Live from the city that had a wall too. Welcome to the show.
How old are you? When were you born?
I was born in 1979, so I'm 42. I joined the army when I was 17, and I left the army when I was 25. So I served for 8 years.
Why did you join the army?
It was a bit of an interest of mine for a long time. I was in the UK. We used to do a thing called Army Cadets, which was for sort of teenagers to sort of wear the military kit, if you like, and go and enjoy themselves in the field and run around and play around in the woods and learn things that you perhaps might learn in the military. So I was quite interested anyway. And then when I got to a sort of 16, 17, I actually wanted to join the police. And I asked the policeman if I joined the army, would that help me get into the police? And he said, yeah, why not? So I then joined the army, and I spent a bit longer than the original time that I wanted to join. Was 3 years, but I ended up doing 8 years. So yeah, that's the main reason, really.
Why would that help? Why wouldn't you have been able to join the police straight away?
I think I probably could have, but at the time I didn't have the maths and English grades. So I thought that by getting some experience in, the military might have helped my chances of getting in. In hindsight, I should have just worked harder at school. Like I say, I thought I'd join the British Army for 3 years, then I'd become a policeman and then work my way up as a police officer. But that never materialised. I stayed in the British Army for 8 years, which had its good and bad moments. And then when I left, I became a carpenter for a few years. Now I actually teach carpentry at a college.
Sam, how was your army training?
It's very different. It was one of the episodes that I'd actually spoke about previously, and it sort of stripped you right back from who you were. So any identity that you had originally was almost removed, and you almost started again. So your mindset was completely different to who you were, and that's where things began to sort of, I suppose, snowball over the years, really, leading up to sort of living with PTSD now. I think comes from that starting point.
But you were quite enthusiastic. You've been quite enthusiastic going into the army, no? Or it's like you did your cadet training and.
Yeah, I was really keen, but I probably, when you get in there and there's a lot of you all together in the same situation, and there's a lot of fear there as well, because you're constantly being told that you're not good enough, to strip you back to then rebuild you into a soldier. So there was a lot of fear and anxiety there originally, but then came the sort of you're all in it together. And I did realize that's what I wanted to do, but there was also quite a lot of fear there, thinking, am I good enough to do this? But I suppose, yeah, the interest at the start was there, definitely.
So you became engineer in with the Royal Army. What was your job exactly? What was your training there?
Yeah, so the Royal Engineers is quite a multi-traded sort of unit, really. So in the end, I used to drive the 60-ton Royal Engineer tanks, which was basically mine clearance, sort of mechanically laying bridges as well. We used to deal with explosives and demolitions, a lot of bridging. What else did we do? We did all sorts. Water supply, so we used to sort of get clean water to the troops, etc. Kosovo was our first tour, and we were sort of told that it was more of a peacekeeping tour. It certainly didn't feel like a peacekeeping tour. It felt like we were there to almost try and give people a little bit more of a bit of life back to what they were or had lived. It was my first time really that I'd witnessed sort of the basic human needs, where lots of kids needed food and water and shelter and affection and love, and to see hundreds and probably thousands of young kids and young women, especially because a lot of the men were killed just without those things, was tough. But one of our jobs was to try and bring those human needs back, to give them some sort of direction in their life. And it was very rewarding in some aspects, but it was also very sort of hard to deal with, because it was the first time that I'd seen the complete difference of lifestyle, I suppose. But Kosovo was very different to Iraq. Iraq was very clear that you were going to war and anything could happen, basically. But again, I always felt that the people that had suffered the most were the local people. And a majority of the people sort of met us with a good reception, and almost thanked us for being there. I mean, there were some times that it was very emotional, because the children and the families, especially the children, were just so happy for you to be there and to give them a chance of a better life as such. That was quite hard to deal with as well. The difference was Kosovo felt like that was your main job, but in Iraq it felt like that things could turn at any point. So there was also a lot of hostility as well towards the British forces, and I'd imagine the American forces also, and any other forces, NATO forces that were there. But yeah, it was heartbreaking, rewarding, traumatic, all rolled into one, really, or two.
How long? What did they tell you? Did you get taught anything about PTSD before you went to or started the army in the family, or in the training?
No, nothing at all. It was one of the things that I really struggled with, actually, that prepared you mentally to go to these places, but they never prepared you to come away from that and try and adapt back into what we class as a normal life. So that was very hard to deal with, because it was just completely different. You'd be in a different country doing these things, then you'd come back to the camp. I was based in Germany. Or if you came home, and then everybody would just be completely different, and then you'd go back to these places again, but you were never ever given any sort of direction or mental health awareness training or anything like that.
Well, you were aware that everybody was different.
Yeah, definitely, everybody was different, but I found that a lot of the time, especially with the men, they don't really talk a great deal. about their sort of mental issues. They do more so now, but then, you know, it was, you just had a beer, to be honest, and just sort of got on with it. You didn't really deal with those mental health issues, some of those traumatic experiences, and many still haven't. Many still, you know, live with them every day. So it's yeah, it's a tough one.
And how was Iraq?
Iraq was very different. It felt very very real. The first time that we got there, we actually landed in Kuwait first, and I don't think it's still sunk in of what, you know, the enormity of it until we got a briefing. We used to have briefings every day, and we got a briefing from our section commander that basically sort of said that, you know, somebody had been killed in an explosion, that the local people were being offered money for captures of British and American forces and things like that. And then it felt like, personally, I had to sort of completely up my game. And if I felt that somebody wasn't behaving in a certain way or acting in a certain way, I felt that I needed to step up and tell them that they need to sort of, you know, raise their standards, if you like. So it was quite highly pressurized, but there was never really any moment you could have any respite. You always felt like something may happen at any time. And again, the young people, you know, some of the young people I met had suffered, you know, really, really badly for their lives and witnessed some really traumatic things, and it was heartbreaking. But if we could give them a slight bit of hope and a slight bit of joy, then that was huge. That was huge to me anyway.
How did you meet them? Basically, were they contacting you, or were you going into the villages and
yeah, sort of. If we had would get given a task, and the task might be, we had a task that we had to go and search a farm, and sometimes you'd have an interpreter with you, sometimes you wouldn't, but you'd be going into different regions doing different jobs. And in Kosovo and Iraq, I always found that it didn't matter where you was, there were always children that came to see you and, you know, shake your hand and smile, and, you know, they'd want water and they'd want chocolate, and obviously that's you'd give it to them straight away and things like that. But it was yeah, it didn't matter where you was, there was always somebody that needed some help, and they had absolutely nothing in their life, but yet they were so giving as well. You know, they never used to always come and say, can I have this, give me some water, give me this. They'd come and give you things. I remember in Kosovo we broke down, and there was a young boy that bought us a big piece of bread for us all to eat, because we never had any food. And he was probably, I mean, 8 years old, and he sort of just gave us this bread, and it was just, the kindness was amazing. And I don't think I've witnessed anything like that before, to be honest. It was yeah, very heartwarming.
What were your different jobs, and the difference between the jobs in Kosovo and Iraq?
So Kosovo, when we got there, we were doing, well, all sorts really. I mean, we went into Podievo. There was an airfield there, and it basically needed clearing of mines. It needed sort of sanitation putting in there. It needed defences building, things like that. So we got involved in that quite a lot. We'd go into the hills as well to support sort of local communities with infrastructure and things like transport routes. So we've done quite a lot of bridging there, clearing things for the locals, clearing mines from fields and things like that. In Iraq, again, similar sort of role really, but it was in more of a hostile environment. I mean, it felt like there was a lot more mines in Iraq. I mean, I can remember going out to this area once and there was just, anti-tank mines just on the road. There were small sort of bomblets in a field and there were, children walking around the field. So there was a lot of mine clearance, and we had to defuse some tanks over there because the Iraqi army was using them to fire on, our positions. And also we were told that before we went that Saddam Hussein had access to a lot of chemical warfare, which historically he'd been involved with that before. So we were sort of constantly in and out of our NBC suits and respirators that we had to wear. In Kosovo, there wasn't that. So yeah, it was similar in some ways. Iraq just felt a lot more intense. And it felt, especially with the chemical warfare side of things as well, you felt on edge all the time. So yeah.
And did you get vaccinated for security before you went to Iraq?
Yeah, we had. I talk about this quite regularly. Actually, we had a cocktail of drugs that we were injected. I mean, we had to add anthrax. So we had like anthrax jabs and anthrax boosters. We had our hepatitis A and B. We had our malaria tablets, and we had also a thing called NAPS, the British Army. I think the other militaries used them as well. It's nerve agent pre-treatment sets, which were little tablets that we had to have as well. And I think actually in the British forces, I think there's some guys now that are actually looking into the long-term side effects of taking that particular drug, and it's linked to lots of different things. But yeah, we were on all sorts of different things. It was crazy, really, to think how many different drugs were in our system at that time.
How was barrack life there? What did you do?
Well,
Because
barrack life. Yeah, I really enjoyed barrack life in Germany. I mean, I absolutely loved Germany as a country. I thought the people were fantastic, friendly, and as soldiers, we didn't always have the best name, but I always found that if you showed a bit of respect to the German people, then they would respect you back. And I really enjoyed it. Barrack life, there was lots of training, so you were keeping fit, you were maintaining the vehicles, you'd be doing sort of team sports and team events to sort of get that bond. You'd have on camp, you'd have a shop and you'd have a bar you could go to have a drink. It was pretty good. I mean, a lot of the time you were just training, you were just preparing for going to Kosovo, going to Iraq, places like that, going to Canada, Poland, and places like that.
and were you in Germany stationed with German soldiers or other NATO soldiers?
It was the British Army was in Germany quite a lot. There were quite a lot of different places where they had regiments and camps within Germany. I don't think the British Army's in Germany anymore, but we never really shared any camps with any other forces apart from the British Army, which was a shame, really, because it would have been interesting to sort of get to know different methods and different sort of systems, I suppose, from different militaries, if you like.
Did you do that in Poland or in Canada?
In Canada, there were lots of different sort of forces. We worked with, in fact, in Kosovo, I think we worked with some Finland and Norway. We sort of, in fact, one of the jobs that we did was we built a school in an area which was controlled by the Finnish army. So we worked quite closely with them, and they used to do all the patrols and everything around when we were building the school. Poland, again, it was just a British Army exercise. So was Canada. So you wouldn't always get involved directly, although you might see them in, doing different things. Sometimes in Iraq, we got involved working with the Americans a little bit. So yeah, it was interesting.
You doing your jobs in deployments just as a country, but it's coordinated, no?
I'm not really sure, if I'm honest. I mean, we were in the mindset of, if we get told to go and do whatever it was, we just went and done it. So we got told to get our jabs and I'll take our tablets and everything else, and we just got in the queue. It was interesting, like obviously with the COVID situation, around the world, it sort of made me think about all the different drugs that we had, and all the, the anthrax jabs that we had to have, and the anthrax boosters and the different tablets we were on. It just sort of made me think that, we're walking around with all these different things inside of our bodies, and a lot of us don't actually know what they do. So we're told something, but we don't actually, I don't know what they do. I just sort of go with what people are telling me, really.
They're now studied, the atomic veterans of Britain.
Well, I think I'm led to believe that Saddam Hussein, he had nerve agents which would be airborne, very much like nuclear, I suppose, which would be airborne, and if it landed on your skin, it could be absorbed into your skin, or you could breathe it in, and it would attack your nervous system. And that was, a high risk threat going out to Iraq, which is why we had to wear, for a lot of the times, we had to wear our respirators and everything because of that. And that was an awful thing.
All day long, or just going into different missions?
It was when we first got there, because he'd used it quite heavily in the first Gulf War, and I think he used it against Iran as well. So we were basically told that there's a high chance that he would launch missiles into Kuwait, where the NATO forces were. So there's a high chance that we'd have to wear our safety suits and everything, which was scary because, like COVID, you can't see it. So you don't actually know if it's there or not without doing tests and things like that.
No, I thought when in Iraq, that when you got a mission, you called for your job that day. But you did you know we're gonna meet some Americans who have the same job that day, or some Germans, or?
I mean, we got told that there'll be a lot of different forces out over there. So Americans and Germans. I don't think the French were sent over at that point, but I think there was other European countries that were over there as well. And we didn't really see much of other European forces. We did see the Americans quite a lot because they had a lot of forces over there at the time. But I always felt the Americans were quite gung-ho, quite over the top with things anyway. But no, there were a lot of Americans over there.
How do you mean over the top?
I mean, sort of, I always felt that there were, I suppose, like a cliche really, where it's, a lot of people say Americans are over the top with things, they're big and bold and yeah, sort of thing. And they were true to form, nice people, but everything was, excellent and brilliant and big, and look at our vehicles and it's great and and loud and all the rest of it. So, but they were, they were there to do a job like everybody else.
So there's not much communication. There's a camp and there's a camp, and but it didn't happen like
sort of.
that.
Sort of, yeah. You wouldn't always. It depends on the task and what it involved, really. And the country would be split into different regions where different sort of NATO forces would probably control different regions of the country. If there were certain tasks which needed to involve different forces, you know, British, German, American, then, you know, that would be decided, and then they would sort of push on together as a team. But it always felt quite, you know, you were just the British Army, you know, the Americans would do their thing. The British seem to work with the Americans quite a lot. I think the only time I ever counted German forces was actually in Germany when we were on a camp doing a demonstration as part of training. But other than that, never really encountered German soldiers. Like I say, the Finnish army and the Norwegian army we sort of worked with in Kosovo a little bit. Other than that, yeah, it was completely separated.
Did you hear the radio stations of the other camps?
No, we didn't know. So it was always on different frequencies and things like that. And you'd use different codes to, obviously you didn't want the enemy sort of listening into your radio transmissions. So you'd use different coding systems and things like that. So lots of numbers and letters all jumbled together as a code, and then you'd have to decipher the code. So it was quite secure. You could obviously, different frequencies, you might stumble across, you know, a different military force on the radio, but you wouldn't always know what they were talking about because everything's coded.
And how many people were in your camp in Iraq?
In Iraq, well, originally when we were in Kuwait, I think there was about 1,500. But then when we branched out and went into Iraq, within our squadron, there's probably 150, maybe a bit less. But in and around where we were, there would be other, you know, forces all dotted around different areas. So they've got, you know, they've basically got the ground, the dominance on the ground, if you like.
And with your squadron, that was more on the countryside.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was out in the sand. Yeah, you'd go into an area and it'd be all defensive positions, and it's obviously planned on quite a big scale. But it would be out. We were sort of in a really flat, sandy area, and then the only thing near us was probably about a kilometre away was a huge farm, which we had to go and search at one point. So yeah, it was as expected, really. It was just very hot and very sandy and very intense.
So why did they put you out there?
I think so. Basically, I was talking about a monument. So we went out. I think it was. Hold on, let me get back to the page. I think it was May the 20th. Yeah, May the 20th. We went out to a monument in Iraq, and it was basically for a photo. Like we were all going to have this big photo. And there was a monument in the middle of the desert in a very war-torn country that was perfectly preserved. And it was a monument for all the people that had died between 1914 and 1921. And it was so weird because it was the middle of like a war-torn country, the middle of a desert, and this monument was perfectly preserved. I mean, it literally could have been in London. You know, it was immaculate, but all around it was chaos. But this monument had not been touched. It's almost as if people had respected not to touch it, this monument. And it was quite a poignant moment because obviously we had guys that the British Army that had been killed, and it was a particular poignant moment because we were remembering people that had been killed during an earlier conflict. But for the guys that were there, you know, they could remember the people that had been killed in our conflict. So yeah, I've just wrote here actually, some of the deaths have never had graves or names. completely unfound. And I just said I couldn't even imagine to begin what it would be like during that time. Although we were there at war, we were remembering a previous war, and where people had not even had, you know, gravestones or been found. Just blows my mind. So yeah, that was quite a sad day.
What was that a pure Iraqian monument?
I think I can't remember what the conflict was. I think there was probably at that time, I think there was different forces as well, not just the Iraqis and Iranians as well. I think there were British there as well, and different, you know, European countries that were there during that time that were killed as well. And I think there were a lot of casualties, and it just made me realise actually there's lots of different conflicts that we're completely unaware of, where, you know, people were killed and forgotten almost. Quite sad.
Yeah, my last flat I did share with someone who was 14 in Berlin,
Yeah.
and he got sent to shoot at the Russians with
Right.
14. And yeah,
Wow.
it's really he funnily hates the Americans. So
Oh,
that came after. Do you hear? Have you ever been to Berlin?
Yeah, I've been twice to Berlin. I love Berlin. Yeah, I love Germany. I think it's a great country. Berlin, yeah, I really enjoyed. Not been there for a few years, but went there twice for long weekends. Really enjoyed it.
The British ones have apparently the poorest.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And what did your grandparents do in the Second World War?
My granddad, my dad's dad, he was what's it called? He done national service. So it was like a conscript type thing during that period. But a lot of people, my other granddad, he never actually joined the army as such, but they were doing a lot at home, you know, growing vegetables and supporting communities and things like that. It was a huge war effort, I suppose. But yeah, my other granddad was he was in the national service, and he done a lot there. He was fixing a lot of vehicles and things like that. But, you know, playing his part, I suppose. But yeah, my parents, I weren't really sure how they felt at the time. I think because they saw a lot of it on the news, because we weren't allowed to communicate with each other. You know, the news always portrayed it in a really bad way. So I think my mum was quite scared by it all, which I could imagine, you know, if you've got a son or daughter doing something like that, it's going to be quite scary. So yeah.
Wow, then you must be a late child.
I see. Oh, I don't know.
So how's the attitude towards ex-army in Britain?
It's a tricky one. I think people are trying to. I think a lot of people see ex-forces as people with problems and issues, but also they're seen with quite, you know, there is an affection for the British forces or ex-British forces, and people do raise a lot of money for, you know, charities and things like that. It depends. In different towns, there are different opinions. If they live in a town that's, you know, full of soldiers and things like that, their opinion might be different to, you know, a different place. But there is quite an affection, but they do know that they're often littered with sort of mental health issues and things like that.
So did you with your mates, did they all go to army as well?
No,
Or
no,
were they no, huh?
I was the only one. A lot of them just became electricians and carpenters and things like that. I was the only one to join the army. Although there was a lot of lads at the time that said they wanted to, they never did. There was a couple, but not many. Most of them went into a trade.
And they were not like joining the big protests on the rack, or were they already? Did you notice them?
Not really, no. I mean, again, I suppose when we joined the army, we were stripped back and rebuilt. So a lot of that we didn't even care for, really. I almost felt that we were there to do a job, and we just did it. We just, without question, we were just told what to do, and we did it. And that's literally how it was every single day. You know, you do it without question. And that was sort of the mindset, was literally that. You know, you didn't question things, you just done what you was told, and you do it well, and you make sure that you're supporting each other, and you make sure you're getting home, and your friends, your colleagues are getting home as well. And that's what it was about.
Did you personally cross ever or didn't do an order? You have
How do
something
you mean?
similar like the German soldier law that you can not obey, or?
Oh no, never disobeyed an order. No, I mean there were people that did, but they got basically sent to prison. So you just done what you were told. I mean, later on in my career, I would question things. I wouldn't disobey orders. I'd sort of say, "You sure we need to do this?" And they'd say, "Yeah, you know, go and do it." So yeah,
Yeah.
that was just the mentality, really.
No, but when before Iraq, you didn't. I remember Blur did a big campaign, an anti-war campaign before Iraq.
Yeah.
I suppose even before the guerrillas, there were a lot of marches.
Yeah.
In Britain. Did you notice that?
Not really, no, because we were just, again, I was just sort of, this is my job, and you know, I don't really need to have an opinion on it. I'll just do as I'm told. And it weren't till later on that I would sort of think about things and reflect on things and maybe question things. But at the time, you're just in that sort of attitude of, you know, that's your job and you do as you're told, which sounds crazy, really. But there we go.
Did you have, but you had, did you hear, did you have television in, did you have British television in Iraq?
No, we didn't have any TV or anything like that. We didn't have any communication really for a while. We used to get an odd newspaper, which would be like 2 weeks time difference. So you'd get to read headlines, you know, from a newspaper or whatnot, that, you know, used to get sent out. But other than that, there was no communication at all, or no media at all.